Hello everybody, welcome to Red Tool House. On today's video, I want to talk about why you should consider buying land that's recently been timbered. So come along, let's get into the discussion. So unless you've been living under a rock, you know that rural land or acreage is getting more and more expensive ever since the pandemic. Property values have just risen across the country. So many people are looking to start a rural lifestyle, but they're trying to find the best deal on raw land or acreage that they can create their homestead or farm or rural lifestyle, whatever they're looking for. What rubs against that is the natural resources industry that's constantly timbering land as it comes up available, as the timber stands harvest, and as it makes sense for them business-wise. So while many people shy away from land that's recently been timbered and then put on the market for sale, I want to give you some reasons of why you should actually look at those tracts of land if you're trying to start a rural lifestyle. Well, there's no doubt that timbered land is devalued. If you had let's take our property for example. If we had this 100 acres pristine and had never been timbered, which there's no such thing in the United States anymore, but let's say it had been timbered in over 100 years, then that land is going to have more value than if somebody just came in and cut all the marketable timber off of it. That's kind of a no-brainer, right? The reason primarily, of course, is there's value in all that standing timber. So there's inventory. If the inventory has been removed, then the value of that property goes down. But there are a couple other reasons why that land is devalued once the inventory is removed. The first is there's some additional liability there, especially when you get into the Appalachian Mountains and those situations where there's potential for erosion and water runoff causing those issues. If the forest has been denuded of a lot of the canopy, then of course that rain hits the ground faster, causing water to move off the hills faster and can cause erosion. So there's a liability associated with that. But probably the other biggest reason why land is devalued after it's been timbered is just because of its physical appearance. It just looks ugly. You've got a lot of treetops laying on the ground because timber guys aren't going to process those. You've got, of course, a lot of stumpage. So you've just got these bare stumps throughout the forest. And you have a large butt pile somewhere, which a butt pile is just simply where all the logs are staged to be cut to length to be loaded to the logging truck and hauled off. So that staging area, all those cutaways are usually left over in the corner and piled up to rot away to nothing. So that it has some aesthetic issues with it when people look at this property. But because of that transition in the appearance of the land, it actually could become more valuable for a specific potential land buyer. The homesteading audience, small farming audience, those of us that want to be more self-reliant and live more rural. Why is it more valuable? Well, number one is kind of the obvious. If the land has been devalued because inventory has been removed, then the cost per acre should come down. Should is the key word there. But there's a good chance because it's been recently timbered, that cost per acre has decreased. So it could make that land more affordable for you. Or you could buy more acreage based upon the budget that you have if it's recently been timbered. You're basically buying an empty store if you look at it from an inventory standpoint. Another benefit to recently timbered land is most likely it was recently surveyed, or at least the survey was confirmed. Because timber guys, the loggers, they can really lose a lot of money if they accidentally go off the property and start timbering the neighbor's place, or if they leave inventory behind because they don't know exactly where the line is. So when they purchase the timber, they do their due diligence to go all around the property borders to figure out exactly where the line is. Hey, can I cut this tree here? Or can I cut this tree here? Well, the line's right in between, so we can only cut this tree here. So as a potential property buyer, land that maybe the survey hasn't been touched for decades may have recently been reestablished or reconfirmed because the logging company came in and had to do that. Well, another reason I think it's beneficial is access. And this, for me personally, this moves it to the top of my list of reasons why to consider buying. Now, I didn't buy land that was recently timbered. I bought land 24 years ago and had it timbered immediately. And what I got from that in my 100 acres of valley was access roads all over the place. If you've watched the channel for any length, you've seen me utilize these roads constantly. So these roads take 100 acres that's tough to access, and it's given me the opportunity to literally walk or drive my side-by-side on almost every acre of that 100 acres. Whereas if I hadn't had it timbered, it would have cost me a lot of money to go back and cut those type of access roads. The logging company, because they had to put them in to skid out the logs, they did it for me. All I had to do was just keep them maintained over the last 24 years. And I've actually improved them as time goes along with additional drainage, some culverts, water bars, those type of things. So I've made those roads even better. Well, another reason, depending on the type of timbering that's done, you could have some open areas. You could have a pretty large hole cut in the canopy that allows sunlight in that now becomes potential pasture land, potential silvopasture, building site, barn site, all of those type of things. And again, the hard work's been done for you. The trees have been put on the ground. You just have to worry about cleaning it up and dealing with stump removal. So along those same lines, again, depending on how the timber was cut, if it was more aggressively cut, then you have the ability to control more of the diversity during regrowth. So when you look at certain forests, sometimes they get a little heavy on one species, usually man-made reasons, and you can end up having a forest desert. If you have like a whole bunch of pine and there's just no mast on the ground, then you're not going to be having a lot of wildlife thrive in that area. But if it's been recently timbered, you can come through as the little saplings are growing back the following years. You can come through and you can prune those, or you can completely remove them. Say, okay, I don't want a bunch of sycamore growing here. I want to encourage this white oak or this hickory tree or this maple to be able to grow up. So you'd have control of managing that, doing real forest management practices there, and you'd be dealing with stuff that's this big around instead of huge stuff. So I have the opportunity to control the regrowth. And for you younger people that are looking to buy land in your 20s and 30s, then, Lord willing, you've got decades to be able to manage that. Another reason to consider recently timbered land is a benefit that we had. Again, we bought the land and had it timbered immediately. So while I didn't have all this inventory, all these logs that left the property, I think it was about 145,000 board feet of lumber left the property. What's left behind, of course, are a lot of treetops. And those treetops produced a ton of firewood for us. So in that situation, we were burning wood for heat. So if you're looking to start from scratch with raw land and you're going to build your own house on your homestead and it's been recently timbered, then you can kind of steer, well, I want the house to have a really good central wood burner so I can take advantage of all this raw material that's laying on the ground and eventually will rot if I don't process it and get it under cover. So there's a lot of free firewood, a lot of free heat laying on the ground after a timber project. If you don't use it all for yourself, you could possibly even sell it and generate some revenue from that. So another benefit is something we discovered here as well. We had a pretty mature forest. It had not been cut in about 60 years prior to us buying it. But we noticed once the treetops were on the ground and the timber guys had left, that we started to see an increase in ground birds, turkey in particular, because they had habitat. They had places to hide and nest in these treetops, in some of the brambles that grew up because the canopy hole was created. So we actually saw an increase of wildlife diversity in that situation. They could find a place to hide from the coyotes. So rabbits and turkey, the grouse actually increased a bit. But it really enhanced the wildlife diversity in our area. So you may be saying to yourself, well, those are good reasons, Troy, but that still doesn't trump the issues that you have with timbering. And while I can't read your mind and try to enumerate all the issues that you think, I do want to address some misconceptions real quick that are automatically associated with timbering. And a misconception I hear all the time for people that don't really understand, especially Appalachian hardwood forest, is, well, you've cut it all down, nothing's going to grow back. You're going to have to go back and plant all these trees if you want the forest to grow back. And that is absolutely not true. There is so much seed bank in this ground that if I clear cut this place and I kept it cut and my grandkids kept it cut and then you walked away from it, within 20 years, you'd have the diversity that we have now growing back. That seed bank is there and will be there for a very long time. So on my place, 24 years ago when we had it timbered, I didn't plant a single tree. and you could go all over our property, and other than seeing old rotted stumps, you'd have no idea that this place was timbered. And I didn't have to lift a finger to do any of that. Another misconception about timbering, I want to point this out because you'll see this on listings a lot. And if you don't fully understand it, you may walk away from that listing. But sometimes it'll say property recently timbered, and they'll show a picture of this log staging area or something where there's not a lot of trees. Well, timbering is a very broad process. It can be a very select cut, or it can be pretty much a clear cut. So being able to investigate that listing to see what happened, what type of cut was this? When we had our place done, we did a select cut. Anything 16-inch diameter or less was left alone. While it cost me money at the beginning because I left inventory standing, it's given me the opportunity that if I wanted to timber again here 24 years later, I could, because that intermediate growth is now nice and large. So when you hear the word timbering, don't think it's slash and burn. Another misconception a lot about timbering, especially in places that have a lot of relief like West Virginia, is you think, well, if it's been timbered, it's going to slip. Because you removed the canopy, you removed those trees that are holding the dirt on the side of the mountain, so it's going to slip. And in my experience and everything I've come in contact with over the last 50 years of living in West Virginia, that is not necessarily the case. Of course, when you timber and open the canopy, you do have the opportunity for water to move faster down the mountain. So you may have some erosion issues in some of your watersheds, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have slippage. In West Virginia or any states where there's a lot of red clay, the slippage comes from the water soaking into the ground, creating too much weight, and you have the shear effect with the bedrock underneath. And what I've actually seen, because I've had it on my place, is when trees are left and they get really tall and heavy and big, but because they're growing on a hillside and they don't have the soil isn't that deep, and they don't have the ability to run a taproot real deep, their root balls tend to grow back up the mountain. So what happens is you have very shallow roots, clay soil, and when you get a heavy rain event, all of the weight of that tree that's grown can cause that land to give way. And that's where I've seen slips happen more than in places where it's been timbered. So it's not a guarantee that timber is going to cause the ground to move. And the last misconception is that timbering or logging destroys the ecosystem. And that's simply not true. If it's done responsibly, which all the regulation in place now makes sure that's done pretty well, the ecosystem will be disturbed and it will be altered, but it will not be destroyed. And it will actually come back pretty quickly. And by ecosystem, I mean everything from your fungal layers to your flora, your fauna, all of those type of things that play in that are thriving in the Appalachian hardwood forests. Sure, there's some disruption during the process, and you may make a couple squirrels homeless in that situation, but they're pretty hardy animals. All of those things are going to be able to reestablish. And if you're really worried about the ecosystem and you buy a piece of timbered land, that's where you can step in and actually manage the regeneration of that even quicker. So by placing food plots in some areas that have been cut open, and so now you have grazing opportunities for deer and other ruminants. So if you're in the market for land right now, look at some of those listings. Look for listings that show recently timbered. Look at some comparables around that and see if the cost per acreage is lower on that tract. Before you swipe left and move on to a next tract, maybe reach out and get some information about the type of timbering that was done. If the land is anywhere nearby where you can go lay eyes on it, go see it. See how the loggers left the property when they finished up. Recently timbered land could be a great opportunity to get your foot in the door on starting your rural lifestyle. Well, while we're on the topic of land, I want to do a quick little side comment to say I'm really excited about some things we've got coming up here in the near future on the channel. So in a couple weeks, I'm going to be a stranger in a strange land. This West Virginia hillbilly boy is going to go to Arizona to look at a small farm in northern Arizona, do a tour of it, and just get to experience that whole area. I have never been to the Southwest, so I'm really curious to see what it looks like and really curious to explore it. So obviously we're going to take the cameras, we're going to share all that with you guys, and it's actually a piece of land that's going to become available soon. So the neat thing about it is it will be on the market by the time you guys see the video. So I'm anxious to share it with you. It's a working homestead. It has infrastructure already in place. And I think it's going to be pretty neat. So keep an eye out for that, and I'll make sure to let you know when it's coming live. Well, comment below and let me know what you think. I know a lot of people have run into experiences with logging that are both good and bad, so I'm curious to hear some feedback from y'all. All right, well, I appreciate everybody watching. I pray you have a great week. Take care.